Andrea Miller, she's back, president of NARAL Pro-Choice New York. Thank you for being here.
Thanks,
I do
Liz.
appreciate it.
It's good to be here.
I'm surprised. 58%. You guys spent $500,000?
Well, look, I mean, I understand that there's concern about that 58%, sort of whether people know enough or feel like they know enough about this. And I think that that's obviously always of concern, but we also know that there are a lot of issues that happen in Albany. There's a lot of strum and drum. There's a lot of dialogue. And at the end of the day, what people pay most attention to are the things that directly influence their lives. And I think that's why what you saw in the polling consistently throughout the session was high numbers, constant support for protecting a woman's right to choose, for enshrining that in our state laws. That was over and over again the results of the polls. And while yes, it is true that there are some who still say, a significant number who still say they don't have enough information, when it is posed to them, would you prefer this Women's Equality Act in a manner that includes protecting reproductive choice and reproductive rights and reproductive health, or would you prefer it without? They understand, because they understand that women's equality is interrelated.
What's interesting, though, is what you say. 51% of the population is women. I mean, generally speaking, right? In New York, it may even be a little bit higher. But in terms of when you ask them, what do you know about it? How much have you heard? It's not that different, women versus men. I mean, 26% of women say not very much, 21% say nothing at all. Men, it's 29, 27. So you would think that women would know more, since you're talking about a package that directly impacts women.
Well, yes and no. I mean, let's think about it. After all, we've always seen that a woman's right to choose and women's equality are not gender specific in terms of support. Men are almost as pro-choice as women, and in some demographic breaks, they're more pro-choice than some demographics of women.
Right.
I think what it comes down to is a recognition, as the Women's Equality Act showed, that these issues are intimately related to women's lives, families' lives, and it's not just a woman's issue. And therefore, of course, you're going to have women and men paying attention to it.
Okay, so this has been up, down, and all over the place for a while. You remind me again the situation. You guys are no longer involved with the Women's Equality Coalition. You went your separate way, NARAL, to focus on your mostly focus on your political activity to get a jump on 2014, right?
Partly. I mean, what we really said was, look, our view, and we believe that clearly the public understands this, at least a sizable proportion understands this, is saying, you know what, actually the unfinished business is in the Senate. The Senate is the place that refused to pass the full women's equality agenda and the full Women's Equality Act. The Assembly passed the 10 points. They did the right thing right before the end of session. They continue to be doing the right thing, which is to say that women's equality covers a whole range of issues that are interrelated, and a woman's right to choose is a part of that.
So do you feel vindicated by this poll then? Because the rest of the coalition is saying to the Assembly, come back and at least pass something, particularly because, and many people, not necessarily the coalition, say pass at least some of those 9, because one of them is sexual harassment protection in the workplace, and we know what's going on in the Assembly with that.
Well, look, all of these issues, all 10 points have always been important. They've been important to us from day one, and that's why we were so invested in this coalition and why we thought it was so important during the legislative session to make sure that we were all working together, and we did that amazingly well. The question then for us became, when the session ended and we had to think about how do we stay true to our mission and really focus on what it is our job to do. Our job is to protect a woman's right to choose, to make sure that our state laws reflect that, and ensure access to these services, especially when you consider the backdrop of what's happening in Congress, what's happening before the U.S. Supreme Court with cases on abortion already being accepted, and what's happening in places like Texas and North Carolina and Wisconsin. So our view was, what's our job? Our job right now is to make it yet again clear, we hope, to the Senate, and we think that this latest poll is another reminder and another opportunity to take a serious look at this among the Senate leadership and say, listen, your job's not done. The voters of New York want a Women's Equality Act that includes protecting a woman's right to choose. They've said that every time it's been polled, no matter how you ask the question.
Okay, so now clearly though, you need to reach some percentage of the 58% of people who don't say they don't know enough to have an opinion on this, and clearly, you know, are we going to be hearing war on women in 2014 in New York? Because this is definitely going to be a political issue, quite clearly.
There's no question it's a political issue. It was a huge political issue in the last election cycle. It was absolutely a salient and motivating factor in people's voting, and it was also a motivating and salient factor in some key Senate races. And I think that's, let's not forget, we have Senator O'Brien, we have Senator Kachik, arguably you have Senator Latimer today, because of this issue as being one one of the key issues that was a turning point for those races. So I think we saw that. We saw the power of this because of what's happened at the national level. That's only ratcheted up since that election cycle. And while, yes, there are many voters who need to know more about the Women's Equality Act, I think if you go back to the polling, if you ask people, where do you stand on protecting a woman's right to choose, and do you think that New York State should show leadership, that this should not be a political football, this should be a principled stance where New York can show, as we always have, with a bipartisan agreement, and I really hope that we can get there again, as a state, that because it is a bipartisan issue.
What is clearly though the Republicans, and we talked to her I think last week, believe that going after the women vote or the women's vote is important because they've tapped the first ever woman to serve as their director of political doings. It's Senator Kathy Young. Do you see that as a vindication, a problem? I mean, they're clearly going after women.
I mean, I think it's great. I'm excited to sit down and talk with her. I really do think that there are ways to move forward on this issue, and I'd hope we could.
She doesn't think so.
But I got to say, look, I respectfully disagree with her calculus. I think this polling and every poll that we've taken for the last 2 years shows that if they believe that this is not a salient issue, all they have to do is look at the polling, look at where the voters are, and look at the voting blocks that this conference needs going forward for their future. It's suburban voters, it's women voters, it's upper income voters. It's not only those, but those are some key voting blocks that this conference needs. The only people who believe that we should not protect a woman's right to choose in New York are staunch Republican-only voters and a slice that call themselves conservative. That is not the future. That is about looking back. We need to be looking forward.
How much more are you guys going to spend?
We'll spend what it takes to move forward and protect a woman's right to choose in New York.
Which would be?
I mean, look, it's not the elections yet.
No.
We'll let you know soon.
Oh, good. Well, you'll be back then.
We'll be back when we're ready to tell you.
I'm looking forward to that. Thank you very much, Andrea, for being here, as always.